Finally, we're back working on the underground kingdom, and this project has turned into something much larger than I originally anticipated. Including all of the building that I've done in today's video, the total work time on this project is now well over 200 plus hours. Now before we get into it though, I've noticed that only 24% of you guys watching are actually subscribed to me. So consider subscribing, especially if you want more videos like this in the future. And if you want to see your ideas included in the build, then comment them down below and get this video to 70k likes, and I'll make the final part of this project. So if you want any final input, then this is your last chance. Now, I've been building this and most of my other builds on 1.14 for a while now, simply so I can use World Edit. However, all of that has changed now as we're finally in 1.16. This means we have a huge collection of new block types to work with, including blackstone, warped and crimson wood, and most importantly, chains. So I figured the first step would be updating some of the existing buildings and incorporating a little bit of 1.16 into them. I changed out the dark prismarine blocks used for all the roofing to warped wood. It's a very similar color, but is ever so slightly more vibrant. I mixed in some of the new blue soul lanterns, which you'll see more of later in the video, and changed the regular grass to Nilium, as I thought all of the warped materials fit perfectly with the whole fantasy vibe of this project. I did the same updates to the roofs of the castle and swapped out white concrete walls for the new quartz bricks. If you remember in the last episode, I made this little village atop the stone plinth here with a pathway that forks off in 3 different directions. While 2 of these routes are going to lead to an expansion of the town embedded in the stalactites, the 3rd route leads down the side of the rocky cliff face to the bottom of the cave. This path is very windy and deliberately a little sketchy, as this was going to lead down into the slums area of the village. Now that we're down at water level, I scattered in a mixture of gilded and regular blackstone into the rock. Doing this makes the water appear deeper than it actually is, plus I thought that the temperature would be higher this deep down underground, so I included soul sand and campfires underwater to emulate this. To take this effect further, I created some lava geysers as another feature of the cave floor. In the background, I whip up a roped bridge connecting both sections of land, and then loosely mapped out a pathway for the slums out of wool. I used ladders to access varying levels of the slums, and here I'm making another lava geyser a little closer to land and a little bit more central to what will be the little village. I started populating the area with buildings in a very simple design. I didn't want to make any of them massive, as the idea was to create platforms above the houses and stack buildings on top, really trying to keep this space cramped and bustling. While the houses are simple in design, I added signs on the walls and across the doors and windows to emulate everything being boarded up and shoddily repaired. The lowest tier of buildings at water level are at risk of burning down due to the geysers, as you can see with this burnt down shack I've included next to the lava. On the other side of the village, I managed to copy one of the stacked building sections over, blending it into the cliff face behind, and making a few little edits to them. I really wanted to make these buildings feel worn down and much more in poverty compared to the upper class village above, especially by using the contrasting colours of the new warped and crimson blocks to help differentiate them even further. And you can really see the difference in building design when you compare them side by side. With this platform section and buildings complete, I make another rope bridge stretching across to the other platform of buildings. As we continue around the horseshoe-shaped landscape, I built up 2 more compact, rundown buildings, and then with a 3rd one, made the first larger building. Having said that, it's still not that big, but it's probably considered a mansion in this place. Building up another platform above the 2 small buildings, I again bridge across, connecting it up to the other block of buildings, filling the remaining space up top with a single house, and then adding a ladder down one side to connect back down to the ground floor once again. As we continue round, we end up back at the section that I previously copy and pasted in. However, considering this section of platforms reach water level, I decided to add a 3rd and final level to the stacked platforms, making a few edits to the pre-existing buildings once more, before working on a specialised blacksmith/carpentry building. This had a space outside for tools to work with, and I managed to squeeze in a well on the remaining space next to it as well. Lastly, atop the platform I just created, I again add a single building with a bit more detail than the rest. Finally, I began working on the last large raised platform, and instead of having support beams going straight down to the floor, I decided to build supports back into the cliff face itself, and then used an assortment of different blocks compared to the other platforms. The reason for this is because I decided to build the last big building in the slums, which I assume would be some sort of town hall. It stands out compared to the rest of the houses. I made this stalagmite in the middle of the village, as I wanted to create one platform section to help connect everything together using rope bridges. As I said, I wanted the slums to feel bustling and compact. So, by building rope bridges off in each and every direction, almost like a spiderweb, it transformed the village entirely. Finally, I connected the last few sections of land by the water level, and came up with this small bridge design using chickens hidden underneath, attached to fences using leads. To finish off the slums, I light the place up using the new soul lanterns. In 1.16, you can make item frames invisible, which leads to a whole load of different designs and possibilities to decorate with. You'll see me using them here in the lights and a lot of other places in the build. I then scatter more soul lanterns hanging from chains along the bottom of the rope bridges, and as for the ground level, I make an alternative lamppost design and repeat it throughout the remainder of the village. And lastly, I scatter a helping of weeping vines across the bridges. Off to the side of the slums, I thought I'd include a small fishing dock. As you can see, I've been using a lot of extinguished campfires in this build, simply because they just work so well when making rickety wooden flooring or roofing. Using the invisible item frame technique once again, I had an assortment of fish hanging up from chains inside the little shack. Alongside the docks, I started building a miniature fishing boat, and once happy with the design, I copied it around to the surrounding area. Here I add a few draping vines across the crevice, as previously I felt there wasn't enough foliage and nature creeping into the cave. I also played around with the idea of using water as well, but ultimately decided against it as it obstructed the view of the castle. It's time to add a little light and decoration to the cave ceiling. So I began designing a massive hanging lantern, using the original lantern as a basis to work off of. I used netherite for the chain, so it's not the cheapest of materials for survival, but thankfully I don't have to worry about that. In fact, I tried using only new materials from the 1.16 update when building this, aside from the grindstones, fences and trapdoors of course. For the light source itself, I used a combination of light emitting blocks, added some flames to the tops of them, and lastly filled the lantern with different coloured stained glass to emulate a glow. With the huge hanging lantern complete, I went throughout the cave and started placing them around. Welded it on this version is still a little buggy, so with every new lantern placed in, I had to go around and manually fix them before moving on to the next. Now it's been a little while since we worked on the main castle. We haven't really touched it since the initial building in the first part, but I thought it was about time to make a few changes and sort out the grounds as they were previously left empty. I actually took some inspiration from Zelda Breath of the Wild for this part, specifically Zora's Domain. It features a lot of winding routes leading around to all areas above a body of water. So I decided to do the same and adapt the already existing towers slightly to do the same. I made a cross section in the walkway that would bend off towards each tower, and again using a combination of the new blocks to enhance some features. I made the walkway loop around the towers and then continued to the next tower along. Thankfully, I had welded it to make things a little easier for me. However, as I mentioned earlier, it's still an early version of it, so it's rather buggy. So fixing the newly pasted in sections slowed the process down a little. I deliberately kept the support beams to a minimum and used them only when necessary, which you'll probably see me doing in the background, bringing the stone brick down to water level. Lastly, on the other side, I made a walkway down from the final towers and connected them back into the castle. So the main feature of Zora's Domain is the water, more specifically the massive waterfalls. And of course, I wanted to include some in my build, spewing out of the walls of the cave. I also did this as I wanted to give the little bit of water that already exists in the cave a source. I placed down lots of small spheres against the walls of the cave using blue wool, and once done, covering it with red wool. These are obviously a placeholder which eventually I would replace the blue wool with water and the red wool with barrier blocks. I've used this technique before for creating large waterfalls and keeping its shape without Minecraft's water mechanics trying to fix everything and ultimately resulting in a mess 99% of the time. To top them off, I used cobwebs to give the illusion of the force of the water crashing into the rocks. Above the slums are two stone plinths connected via bridges, with nothing on them. So for the smaller one, I decided to build an elevator, similar to that of the one used in Game of Thrones on the side of the wall, except this would lead down to the water level, which would be the dock that leads to the future mines of the kingdom. Using a combination of trapdoors, signs, and campfires, I was able to come up with this rickety wooden elevator, suspended by chains that would carry workers all the way down. I continued the chains all the way down the elevator shaft and tried to incorporate some sort of pulling system using chains, grindstones, and stone cutters. I added a few piles of barrels that would be filled with goods, and on one of the docks I put together a little crane system to aid workers in lifting heavy barrels to their ship. Using armor stands in your build can be very useful and unique, and combining that with the hidden chicken on a lead results in some special designs. Of course, I had to build the work ships, and building them at this scale was quite the challenge, but inspired by a few designs I found online, I managed to come up with this compact little ship, small enough to navigate through the dodgy route within the cave, but big enough to store plenty of goods to and from the mine, which is one of the final things that we'll tackle in the final part of the kingdom. I made some final adjustments to the elevator shaft, finishing off the pulley system with more chickens on leads, and filled the remainder of the stone plinth with a rocky terrain. At the other end of the bridge, I built up the main gate entrance to the kingdom, reusing the same tower designs from the previous gate entrances and building them down into the stone plinth. The long, windy path that leads to the cave entrance needed some tweaking to make it easily accessible, as it was leading down to the main gate area. Once down here, I also built up some walls, like that around the main castle, to house the area in so that the only way into the kingdom was through the main gate. I continued this all the way around, and then began making another little loading area for workers to travel in and out of the kingdom with their goods. But with that, let's see what we've done to the kingdom so far. Anyway, as always, I hope that you guys enjoyed the build. Make sure you check out the merch. Like I said previously, it's only going to be available for a short period of time, and then once it's gone, it's gone. So you might want to get it while you still can. Check out the links in the description for that and any of my socials. I've also finally got myself a Reddit, so you might just see me popping up here and there, maybe on the Minecraft subreddit. And finally, remember, get this video to 70k likes and comment your ideas down below. And apart from that, I'll see you in the next one, because I'm sweating, as you can tell. It's really hot. Help. Bye.